Good evening, everyone. We welcome you all to OrthoTV Monday Motivation Webinar Series. And to introduce today's topic and speaker, I hand over to our moderators, Dr. Dhiren Ganjwala and Dr. Satyen Mehta.
Good evening and warm welcome viewers of Motivational Monday program. We know that you are very eager for the new episode of this program. The guest of today's session is Anuja Chandramouli, who is a best-selling Indian author. She is considered to be one of the finest writers in mythology, and she's going to speak on a topic which is very dear and near to her heart, and that is Indian mythology relevant in modern times? I know that there are going to be a lot of controversies on that, a lot of questions on that, but we are very eager to listen to that. Before I hand over, let me give some information about her. She published her first novel, that's Arjuna, in the year 2012, and it instantly became the bestseller on Amazon. After that, she wrote few more books on the famous historical characters like Kartikeya, Ganga, Prithviraj Chauhan, Padmavati, and Muhammad Taghlaq. Because of her popularity of the books, now they are available in the audio form, and they have been translated in Hindi also. She is an accomplished TED speaker and a storyteller, and it's really worth very interesting to listen to her TED talk on the storytelling, how to make it very interesting. Her another YouTube channel that's on Mahabharata, that's also very popular YouTube channel and a YouTube series. She is very passionate about sharing her skill and experience with others. And so she conducts a lot of workshops for the school and the college students, how to write stories and how to carry out storytelling. So before I tell just one more additional thing, she's from Shivakashi, that's in Tamil Nadu. And the Bharatnatyam is also a very popular dance of Tamil Nadu. And she's an accomplished Bharatnatyam dancer also. So with that, I hand over to Madam. It's all you. It's all you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dhiren, for that very sweet introduction. And I would like to thank OrthoTV for this lovely opportunity. I look forward to sharing my thoughts on this subject, which I'm very passionate about. So without further ado, let me just plunge into my webinar. So for starters, a lot of people have wondered about the resurgent lure of mythology, about why it continues to be so relevant after so long. And see, normally when people think of mythology, it's all about gods and goddesses, and you have your demons, you have epic battles, you have magic. It's all a flight of fantasy. It's larger than life. It's like watching Lord of the Rings or something. It has that vibe. And yet, you know, people relate to it. People relate to it, I feel, because it is, at its core, it's very much rooted in reality, on everyday issues which we all grapple with. It runs the entire gamut of human emotions, the 7 deadly sins, whatever, think of it, you name it, it's there. And I personally, for me, when I read it, the sense I get when it comes to mythology, it's not, it doesn't have much to do with religion. It doesn't have much to do with spirituality or even philosophy. As far as I'm concerned, Indian mythology is a quest for answers to questions we've always had. It's a search for solutions to every problem that has ever plagued mankind. So we can't say that we are not dealing with issues which our ancestors dealt with. You know, it's the same. It's the same. Whatever you take, the process is still ongoing. And I think mythology just helps make sense of little things like that. And that's why it is so important. And really, religion isn't the big part of it, though many people think otherwise. So on that note, I'll just leave that there. And I will go on to other factors which make mythology so relevant today. We'll start with the moral values, which is, you know, a big selling point as far as most parents are concerned. Again, I will say that when it comes to mythology, it's not just about force-feeding children moral values. It's using the stories It's using the mythology which has been preserved in stories, music, and dance to teach children to be the best version of themselves, to teach them good conduct, good behavior. Moral science class just isn't going to cut it. But when you just present them with the stories, they absorb so much of what's good in those stories. So I always tell parents, I'm not, when I share stories with children, I'm not trying to, just highlight only the morals. And I know that they're not listening to me 100%. Today's ADHD kids, they drift off, but that's okay. I always tell parents it's okay. They will. It's like tuning into a radio station. When something or browsing through Netflix and Amazon, when something interests them, they actually stop and absorb it so beautifully. And I think it's a great way to create a generation of leaders, of really good people, which is the need of the hour. Because so many of our children, so many parents have the same complaint. We talk about this gadget addiction, about how, it's not like before where you get to spend time with your children, because even adults have gadget addiction now. They're all very close to our smartphones. I think the most important thing in our life is our smartphone for a lot of people. So, so that, which is why it's not just a problem faced by children, it's a problem with adults also. And the thing about stories and Indian mythology, the treasure trove of stories that is Indian mythology is, no child can ever resist a good story. That still holds true today. So that again, that's one of the beautiful things which make it
So,
so
madam,
relevant.
about this point that you're saying, a very interesting point about kids and trying to get their attention is very difficult. So, you are doing you're doing a lot of this work for kids. How do you get their attention into these stories? How do you get their attention to what you want them?
It is very simple actually. I don't go there with a sales pitch for them. I don't
Hmm.
go and say, see our Indian mythology, it's our culture, it's tradition, it is, so beautiful. It is going to, just make you a better person. We have to remember our past. It's such a glorious past. Take pride in being Indian. I don't tell them any of those things because I'm sure they've heard it all before. And as I said, that's not why I love Indian mythology so much. All I do is I expose them to my favorite stories, the stories which resonate the most with me. And there's so much. It's a bottomless sea. You can spend your entire lifetime devoted to unearthing the secrets of Indian mythology, and there'll be so much you don't know, so much you haven't covered yet, right? It's a beautiful, beautiful journey to just disappear into that world. And there's so much depth to these stories. They can mean so many things to you at different points in life. So for me, it's like a travel. It's an odyssey which is filled with adventure and fun and these interesting characters who've been preserved in those pages for thousands of years. And I just share some of my excitement to the children. So, whether stories about Mahabharata, Ramayana, I'm usually hired, to impart moral values to children, but the children are pleasantly surprised because I'm really not giving them a lecture. I just tell them the stories, and even then, I don't say, see cause and effect. So and so did this, so he was rewarded. This is the villain. I don't do that. I let them judge for themselves. I just present the facts to them because I feel at its heart, Indian mythology is neutral. It can mean whatever you want it to mean. It can mean different things to different people. A lot of your biases, your experiences are reflected back when you expose yourself to Indian mythology. So I just present it as it is to children, and they love it. We have these little discussions. For instance, I like exploring powerful female characters. So I'll always, that's my personal thing. So I know I'm being biased. So in a class, I'll be saying, okay, see this lady, take Satyavati for instance. I said, see, she was a lowly fisherwoman, and see, she became a queen, and she founded a dynasty. And I said, don't you think she's brilliant? And some of the boys will be a little comfortable. They'll say, no, we think the men did a better job. It's okay. I won't immediately say that's chauvinism. I'll just leave it. I'll just say, so you feel that way, huh? I think I'm as smart as a boy. Do you disagree? And they'll just, look a little uncomfortable. I let them chew on it for a bit. So I think that's an important thing to remember when you're trying to impart, mythology to children. You hold on to their attention by trying not to hold on to it. I let them drift if they want. I know that not every student in my class is paying attention, and I'm cool with that because they'll drift in here and there, and they'll be very lively. They'll ask lots of very interesting questions, And for me, it's a learning experience. I don't know whether they are learning anything from me or not, but it's a learning experience. And I just want them to explore more on their own. I encourage them to follow up on characters and subjects which interest them on their own. And it's really cool how you create a generation of mythology fans that way. Because it should be their personal journey. It should not be something where we hold their hands and drag them kicking and screaming into the past. Let them do it on their own if they're interested. And at various points, your interest will flare and then it will probably die down a bit. So with children, that's how it is. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, yes, yes. Please go ahead.
Right. And I also thought, yes, Dr. Dhiren has a question for me.
Yeah, before we move on, like I have a very basic question. We know that the Ramayana, Mahabharata, they are the very popular mythological story. What about the Panchtantra? Whether that comes under the category of mythology or it's not in that category?
See, Dr. Dhiren, I'm glad you asked me that. The beauty of Indian mythology is it's very, very inclusive. You know, it's now Panchatantra. The Jataka tales are also considered Indian mythology. Though, I told you, some people bring in the religious aspect of it and say, no, that's Buddhist, that's this, that. So, but if you leave it out, all the regional folklore, all of it comes under Indian mythology. Because, Ramayana and Mahabharata are the Sanskrit epics which everybody knows. What about the 5 great epics from Tamil Nadu? I don't think anybody will know about the Silappadigaram, or even in Tamil Nadu itself, I'm saying. So, regional folklore has been sadly neglected. But when I research these stories, I find that it is so rich. There's so much that's covered. There's so many additions to the Ramayana and Mahabharata made from different parts of the country, all of which contribute to making mythology so vibrant. In fact, I always think of it as a living organism. For a piece of art to survive, it cannot be allowed to stagnate. So every time a storyteller steps forward from anywhere in the world, they take this existing material. It's an illusion that we are creators. Everything is built upon an existing foundation. In fact, the Ramayana and Mahabharata themselves have been built on something which was handed down, on knowledge which was handed down. So it wasn't exactly created from scratch. So every time a storyteller adds something to it, when they add a little bit of their heart and soul, their personal biases, even if it's not entirely pure, whatever, it all contributes to the life of this piece of art. So I genuinely think of it as a living organism, which is very open to influences from everywhere. And we shouldn't resist it. We shouldn't treat mythology as something that is written in stone. We should be willing to accept those who want to play around with the material, provided it's treated with respect, of course, and add something new to it. When you change the narrative a little bit to reflect your times, that's what makes it beautiful, that our stories reflect who we are. And I genuinely think we can change the narrative one story at a time.
So, madam, what you're saying is that even the Ramayana, as it has been, given to us, of course, there are various versions of it, but I mean, we don't know whether there is actually this is the real Ramayana or not. It's just another, understanding of by the author of that subject. And what about all the controversy which goes all around it, and that this is the birthplace of Ram, and this is where all these things were done, and this is all written in stone. No, this happened. So, what do you have to say to that?
I'm so glad.
Yeah, and my question is also, sorry for interruption. My question is also related to the same one. Like you mentioned about the changing the narratives. So can you give us one example, like what was the original and how you change it to for the best fitting or in the present context?
For sure, Doctor, for sure. Thank you so much. I really love both those questions. I'm going to sink my teeth into it. So I'll start with Dr. Satyen first. Your question was about the controversies of the Ramayana. Now, let's talk about it. It should be talked about in a calm, rational manner without people threatening to kill each other over the stories, which is something we do in India, unfortunately. Now, when we take the Ramayana, let's talk about the problematic aspects of it, which of course is the Agni Pariksha of Sita. It's one of the big deals about the Ramayana. And even with the Ramayana, you get it was changed. Valmiki originally conceived it as the story of the perfect man. But later, there was talk that Rama was not a man, he was not a mortal, he was an avatara. We can understand why that can happen because in India, we tend to hero worship our cricketers, our actors, even our doctors. We worship the people we admire, we place them on pedestals. It's something we do, which I've always felt is a risky business. Because when you place someone on a pedestal, all you're doing is you're setting them up to tear them down from that pedestal. Because your expectation of this archetype is so insane that no man, no mortal or immortal can live up to those expectations. We do that all the time. Either we love somebody too much to a fault or we hate them to a fault. So when Valmiki wrote that it was supposed to be the story of the perfect man, a good king, but the problem was he used the word perfect. And when you say perfect, human nature is very contrarian. We look for imperfection, and we found it with Rama. That's what happened. He himself did not think of himself as a god. Let's leave the question of the Avadara out of it. Rama himself says that I'm a man. He tells Brahma, you know what I'm doing here better than I do. He was learning as he went along, and he was a man who was trying to do his best. And the Agni Pariksha, you get the feeling that it is so out of character for Rama that Valmiki tacked it on to address the controversy that was generated by the fact that Sita had been kidnapped. She'd stayed in another man's house, and her husband had accepted her back. So again, in India, women have traditionally been viewed as possessions. Again, that's too simplistic. It's more complicated than that because there have been powerful women throughout history who exercised agency. But out here, the question became, a woman's virtue. So what if it's been compromised? That was something that came up, and Valmiki tried to address it. That's what happens when you start addressing the lowest common denominator. The troll who's calling out ugly accusations in the crowd, I will always say that somebody who speaks, who casts vulgar allegations, you should not, honor them by responding to their trap. But Valmiki made that little mistake, in my opinion. This is entirely my view. He tacked on the Agni Pariksha out there, which is completely out of character for Rama. You take a character like Ahalya, she's also there in the Ramayana, and it's Rama who sets her free when he's told that she's guilty of adultery. Rama didn't treat her with revulsion, he treated her with compassion. He freed her from that curse that she had. It's such a horrible punishment for her to be cursed, to be stoned for an eternity. And Rama set her free. That's who he was. He was so kind, so compassionate, even to someone he barely knew. And Sita, on the other hand, was the love of his life. So asking her to prove her virtue and having all the gods endorse her virtue was a big mistake. Because see, in real life, fact imitates reality imitates fact. It's a vicious cycle, the chicken and egg question. So in real life, Valmiki wound up setting a precedent where women had to establish their purity, their virtue beyond the standard, beyond a certain thing of suspicion. It was impossible for women to live up to that kind of ideal because you're asked to enter the flames. Real women are going to burn, and you have Sati and Johar practiced in India. So these are the unsavory elements of mythology which we need to address for what it is. It is unsavory, and that is why I talked about changing the narrative. And see, that's only one controversial aspect of it. There are other controversial aspects of the Ramayana which is covered in the Uttarakhanda. It didn't stop with the Agni Pariksha. And Uttarakhanda is Valmiki is not credited with the authorship of Uttarakhanda. Again, this controversy wouldn't die down. So it went on and on and on. And so more and more was stacked on. So some people do not consider the Uttarakhanda as part of it. Some people do. And again, like I said, it doesn't matter. Views are subjective. It's okay. So you talked about how some people say this is the version of the Ramayana set in stone. That there are some people like that. People also ask me, do you believe in God? Do you believe in these characters? Now, I am an agnostic, but I do have a spiritual side as well. So I always say, see, it's not just characters from Ramayana, Mahabharata. I've written about certain fictional characters also. Yama's Lieutenant, which is a fantasy, Yama's lieutenant is a man named Agni Prakash. I'll say they are all real. In my head, they are all real. Whether it's Krishna is my childhood buddy, Arjuna is the great love of my life. They are all in my head. In that sense, they are real for me. It can mean something else to somebody else who's going to worship Rama, who's going to worship Krishna. And sometimes people may just read it for the entertainment value of the Mahabharata Ramayana because it's good. We love the Greek mythology. We love Roman mythology. We just enjoy it. Nobody worships those gods anymore. But the mythology itself endures, right? So it can be different things to different people, and we have to accept that. And now I'll just head over to Dr. Dhiren's question. You asked about where I've changed the narrative, how I've done it. I'll give two examples. In my book, Ganga, now the most famous story about Ganga, which everybody in India knows, is how Shiva tamed her. He humbled the pride of Ganga. She was known as the crooked one. Now, initially, I'm not sure if people know the full story because Ganga as well as Parvati are sisters. They are daughters of Mount Himavan. And initially, since Ganga is the elder sister, the gods approached her. They asked her to do penances to win Shiva's hand because at that time Sati had died and Shiva had retreated into asceticism. The gods needed him to come out and help them. So they were hoping Ganga would embark on that road. And she said, why should I? Let him make the effort to win my hand. Why should I make the effort to win his hand? So apparently Brahma named her the crooked one because she was that proud. And Parvati, the younger sister, she agreed to do this. Again, it's lovely that I personally, I feel mythology doesn't judge either of these women. Both did their own thing, it's fine. But I don't know, see here Parvati is venerated, whereas Ganga had to be tamed. And it's the taming of the shrew narrative, which I'm not a fan of. I think it's Shakespeare's poorest work of the Lord. I really hate it to pieces. And I felt this was similar, where Shiva humbles her pride, holds her imprisoned in his locks, and wears her as an ornament. So when I wrote it, it wasn't like that. It was it's just a subtle shift in the interpretation. The way I put it, her powers were so great that it's true that she did threaten to overwhelm the three worlds because at that time she was again I'll give a little backstory here. She had a mortal lover named Mahabisha. She'd fallen in love with a mortal king, and that was forbidden apparently for them to fall in love with each other. And Brahma had cursed them to be separated. So in my book, Ganga responds in rage to that and threatens to drown the three worlds. And then Shiva goes to her as a supplicant, asking her to spare all of them. And then she chooses to nurse her wound and rest a while in his jaras. She makes that choice. And in a way, both the fates of both the sisters were entwined with Shiva. So it was one of those unconventional unions where Ganga refuses to be tied to one man, but she did have a very intimate relationship with Shiva because he wore her like a second skin. It was something not even Parvati could claim. So it was just, you look at the nuances here, it's the same thing. She did rest in his jatas, but she made that choice when he approached her and asked her to forgive them for what they'd done. So, it's nice when men step up and say, I'm sorry, we did you wrong. So that's how I interpreted it. I didn't deviate too much from the narrative. Now, second time round, another liberty I would have taken is a little bit more left field, I should say. This one was in my book on Kartikeya, on Shakti. It comes up in Shakti as well as Kartikeya. And it's the whole concept of Ganesha. The North Indians are very, very fond of Ganesha. Of course, in the South also, he's the smasher of obstacles, etc. So when you explore his origin story, everyone says that Ganesha was the child of divine descent. He was born when Shiva and Parvati had an epic spat as a married couple. And Parvati creates Ganesha from her own being. It's interesting that both these children were born in unconventional manners. Kartikeya was only born of the destroyer, and Ganesha emerged from Parvati. So I figured that since Parvati created him, Ganesha was originally a girl, because our ancients did have an understanding of mythology, and I envisioned Ganesha as Parvati's daughter. And of course, this daughter of Parvati took on the might of Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma, and the celestials, led by Kartikeya. So, a daughter of Parvati, a Shakti born of Shakti, did perform this tremendous feat, and everyone knows the rest of it. Shiva and Vishnu teamed up to kill this daughter of Parvati. And Parvati, again, she threatened to consume the world with her rage. And Shiva again apologized. And when Ganesha was raised again, I felt that's when he became, his gender is ambiguous, I feel. Because Kartikeya is very clear that he's a child of Purusha. Ganesha, on the other hand, I feel it's a little ambiguous. So I just explored that, I interpreted that a little way. Just to say that, I don't know, it was just a question I explored. I know that traditionalists wouldn't be very happy with this view, but it made sense to me, and I always go with what makes sense to me. So I hope that answered your question. Just small ways you can change the narrative to make it.
Yeah, I must say, madam, I'm enjoying your version more than the original one.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And where do you do the research? Like,
Yeah,
say,
especially the
what?
Ganga version was very.
Dr. Satyen, you're on mute.
Yeah, Dhiren sir, go ahead.
Yeah, so basically, like, how do you carry out a research? Because how do you find out the original version and then you decide that this is the original version and I need to change? Because probably what we are getting is only last 100 years because the printing is available only for like 100 or 200 years. So what about the before that?
See, that's the thing with Indian mythology again. I'm glad you asked me about the research because we are going on talking about how everyone seems to assume that there's one straightforward version, which is the real version, which is the truth. Most people feel that, but if you start doing your research, you find that there are so many versions. Even if you take the whole of Puranic lore, you're studying the Upanishads, you're trying to study the Vedic text. You go way back and you realize that there is so much, there's a lack of consensus in the same stories. Okay, because if we all know that originally the Trinity we consider supreme today, in the Vedic text they aren't given pride of place. If you want to really go back all the way, even that, like you said, it's only in the last few centuries or so that we've had it written down. Till then, it was an oral tradition, which is a blessing and a curse because since it's an oral tradition, it survived the depredations of foreign invaders. And it wasn't just one place where we stored all the scrolls which they could burn down. This is an oral tradition, it survived. But because it's an oral tradition, it's not 100% accurate. No matter, take the simplest story, and there are 5 different versions out there. And there are lots of gaps in the narrative also. For instance, the Vedic texts, Indra, there was Pusha, there was Rudra. Vishnu really didn't have much of a place, and neither did Shiva. So this is like the pre-Vedic period where the shifting narrative brought these gods into prominence. Because I think right now we are less threatened by thunder, lightning, the sun, the fire. Science and technology took us to a different place. So it reflects the changing times also our mythology, and there is no straightforward narrative. I try to go back as far as I can. I love the ancient text, but for me, I tried. It's a process of exploration where I try to capture the essence of the material. And if you get bogged down with accuracy and just finding that one version, I feel it's very, very restrictive. You close your mind to all the versions out there. Uh, you know, it's very amazing how a pattern emerges when you open your mind to the different possible versions out there. So I try to, I have a foundation based on research, based on the extensive research I do. I have all handwritten notes, usually like this. I have one diary where I just, jot it down the old-fashioned way just to make sense of the jumble. There's so much there. And I also, once the foundation is laid in place, I mentioned that there are contradictions in various versions of the story. For instance, if you take the Ramayana and Surpanaka story, Kamba Ramayana will be slightly different because, Surpanaka was from the south, and Valmiki's version is very harsh, where you have this black, Rakshasi demoness who's got no culture. She's a jungle dweller. She has no polish. And she's a princess from Lanka. The Lanka was the most prosperous kingdom in the three worlds. They say Ravana's wealth exceeded Kubera's as well. Kubera was his half brother who he fought and won a battle against. And he'd also prevailed against Indra. So the wealth of Lanka defied belief. So if you're going to suggest that Ravana's only sister, Surpanaka, was some sort of savage jungle dweller who had no manners, no polish, no refinement, you can sense the bias there, the north-south divide, which we still grapple with, by the way. It's still there, unfortunately, though we're all Indians. But when IPL is happening, you see the passions run high between the southern teams and the northern teams. It's there. We just need to acknowledge it's there and try to get past our differences. So in Kamba Ramayana, which is the southern version, Surpanaka, again, she's a beautiful princess who was, it's just like a Rakshasa ladies where they weren't bound by the conventions of the northerners. They moved freely. Widows were expected. Surpanaka was actually a widow. Her husband had been killed by Ravana, which is why she couldn't stay in Lanka. She was nursing up her grief. And Rakshasa women moved around freely. And if they were attracted to any man, they felt free to approach him, which was quite an alien concept, since in the north it was women like Sita who were venerated, the virtuous, docile girls. Again, it's just two viewpoints. And Surpanaka has been unfairly villainized. I'm not saying her conduct was above reproach. Men and women should be able to handle rejection. And she handled rejection very poorly. But I also feel Lakshmana as well as Rama could have handled the situation with more grace. We talk about Rama and Lakshmana being such epitomes of virtue. They should have understood her feelings, acknowledged it. And there's a very beautiful story when you leave Dwapara Yuga, when you leave Treta Yuga behind and go to Dwapara Yuga, which is where Mahabharata said, they say that when Krishna entered Mathura to kill his uncle Kamsa, they mentioned this character named Kubja. And, they say she was hunchbacked and, Krishna blessed her when she took the Rati. And they had a certain relationship, Kubja and Krishna. They say Kubja was Surpanaka reborn because they knew that an injustice had been done to Surpanaka. Her desire was not acknowledged, it wasn't fulfilled, and she had been so cruelly treated, all in furtherance of fate's design, of course. She had to be hurt so that her brother could fight this war and die in the war, which was the purpose of the Avatara. So, fate kind of offers some manner of a measure of comfort to her. And they say Kubja and Krishna, in Krishna's hands, she found the solace she sought in Rama. So it's nice when you explore it this way, look at the big picture, see what happened to all these traditionally reviled characters. And you find that there's so much, you try not to judge them. You just try to understand where they're coming from. Every character brought something to the table. There's something you can learn from every character. Just on this note, since I brought up Surpanaka and research and all that, let's talk about Mahishasura. Durga Puja is celebrated every year in India with great form. And it's always about Durga slaying the buffalo demon. That's all people know about Mahishasura. That he was this evil man. He inflicted lots of violence. He was filled with hate. And the goddess, manifested to kill him. But not many people bother to find out his backstory. So if you do your research, you will learn a little bit about who Mahishasura was, where he came from, why he did the things he did. And as always, we see him as a villain, but there was a reason he did the things he did. His father and uncle were two Rakshasas named Ramba and Karamba. Now these two were performing penances because they wanted sons. And Indra, the king of the gods, he's not exactly the most impressive character out there, right? So Indra was threatened that these two were performing penances. He thought they were after his throne. So immediately he took the form of a crocodile. Karamba was submerged in waters, and Ramba had entered the Panchagni. This mortification of the flesh thing is a common trope, I guess. And taking a form of a crocodile, he killed Karamba. Basically, when he was defenseless, when he was lost in penances, that's when he killed Karamba. So he thought the grief of his brother's passing will distract Ramba, which is a cold move. And Ramba prevailed. Despite his grief, he prevailed. He got a boon from Brahma saying that his son will prevail over Indra. And of course, Indra wasn't going to let the matter rest. He sent Kamadeva after Ramba. And when Ramba was returning to his kingdom after winning this boon, Kama released his potent darts of love and made Ramba fall in love with a she buffalo. And see again, this was something which is so unconventional even today. That Ramba's wife, his lover, was a she buffalo. This was too much even for the Rakshasas, who were considered more sexually liberated than the Devas. So he was hounded out of his kingdom, chased from one place to the other. This she buffalo was heavily pregnant. They were chased. He died trying to protect the she buffalo, and she also died after giving birth to Mahisha. It was the Yakshas who offered some measure of, they offered some shelter and protection for this child. So, he was born in blood. His parents died right there. He was born out of blood and violence, instigated by Indra, not by the Asuras. And he felt perfectly justified in avenging his parents by dealing with the Devas so harshly. So I'm not condoning all his actions. I don't think violence is always the solution. I don't know why revenge is so glorified in mythology, because I feel there's no satisfaction to be had there. So when Durga, knowing all this, what she offered Mahisha was a release from hatred, from anger, from the cycle of violence he was trapped in. So again, it's not just about her lifting up this trident in rage and decapitating the buffalo demon. It was about the fact that at the end of this bloody journey he'd undertaken, they call it the left-handed path in Tantra and Sakta worship. It's not for everybody. Not all of us have what it takes to undertake a journey like this to find salvation at the goddess's feet. So it's actually, when you look at it that way, when you look at the depths that way, it's a very beautiful story of everything he underwent just so he could, find release at her feet. So this is the whole story and not just the bits we celebrate. To simplify, sometimes we make it simplistic. And when you truly explore mythology, you let go of a lot of the pettiness and the spite and the rest of it, which is the true essence of mythology and why it ought to be relevant.
Yeah, it's a very good explanation, madam, about what you've given. You're talking to us about the, from the villain's point of view, whether it's actually a villain. There is, and maybe you're talking about that maybe there is no black and white. We are all different shades of gray, and sometimes it makes sense to look from their point of view. And maybe it was a blessing for him for what he received from. And I think a lot of your explanation gives a hint of a lot of feminism and a feministic point of view as well. And of course, it goes in with your thinking, and it's a great, point of view. It's a completely different point of view on a lot of these, and I'm sure a lot of people would like to explore this further by reading your books. Yeah, Dhiren sir, questions?
Yeah, I shall like to ask you the two questions. The first question is, there are so many characters in this Mahabharata or Ramayana, and the person who is reading for the first time, it's very difficult to remember like who is who. So, do you think so? Like when you are writing, or like because you are very familiar with that, probably you know all the character. But for a novice like me, it's very difficult to remember the relation with each character.
A lot of people ask me this, and they ask how I'm able to keep track of the characters and stuff like that. Again, it's not something I tried to do. When I was 4 or 5 years old, when I was first exposed to the Ramayana and Mahabharata, I wasn't really thinking of a career in future writing about these gods and goddesses, was I? I was just enjoying it for what it was. And I'm telling you, it's a process of discovery even now for me today. After all the research, after everything I've done, every time I read somebody's version of the Ramayana, whether it's Rajaji or Ramesh Menon or Ashra Satar, whatever it is, I discover something new. It's a very humbling thing. So I really tell children, I tell parents, don't worry about the names, just jump in. maybe some character will talk to you more than the others. It can vary from person to person. Like you mentioned, I'm drawn to the characters with shades of gray. I like looking at the villain's point of view. So, different, every story has something for everybody, for everybody's taste. So I really don't think you should fixate on the names and the complexity of Indian mythology, because it is very complex. And it can be very simple also. That's the beautiful part of it. It's both. It's appropriate for a 2-year-old, and it's appropriate for a scholar. It's appropriate for someone who's just a casual passerby. It can be anything. It's not really a big deal. And while we are talking about the feminist angle and the rest of it, I just wanted to add one more thing about it. So now, one of the talking points today is about the LGBTQ, right? That's also something, it's all something we talk about when we talk about women's liberation. First of all, I want to clarify that when right wingers talk about culture and tradition and use it against women, it is a gross misinterpretation of mythology. As I pointed out, mythology is full of powerful female characters with plenty of agency. It's just that, over a point, at one point in our history, mythology was controlled by one community of scholars who had access to education, who had access to all this material. They safeguarded it, and they kind of foisted a particular narrative on everyone. Fortunately, because of this oral tradition we have, it didn't really end there. This material is now accessible to everybody. So, and it's the same when my latest book is on Mohini, and I was so surprised to discover just how forward thinking the men behind this material are, the scholars who tried to understand the different types of humans there and the different sexual needs of everyone. There are so many stories out there. Just a small example would be Mohini herself. As you probably know, Mohini is the female avatar of Vishnu, the protector, one of the most masculine gods in the pantheon, so secure in his manhood, there's no question about it. And yet he felt that sometimes a feminine touch is needed. He felt that since Shakti can do, goddess Durga had to do something special to take down the buffalo demon, which none of the men could manage. I think that inspired him to embrace his own feminine side. And that's how you have Mohini, when he decided that, sometimes force is not always what works. Sometimes you do have to use, and again, it's not just seduction. That's not what Mohini is about. It's just that woman's touch. Again, I'm not going to say man's touch, woman's touch. It's just that there are different approaches to a problem. And Vishnu also was exploring. And Shiva was attracted to Vishnu in his Mohini avatar, and a child was born to them. And that's a big controversy now today with Sabrimala and Ayyappa, which is sad because this is such an inspiring story that the Abrahamic religions have a puritanical touch to them, and we need to understand that a lot of the British scholars have also put their stamp on this material, which is where the puritanical aspect came in with regard to sex and sexuality and desire. Because the Kama Sutra is such a rich treatise. It's not a sex book the way everyone seems to think it is. It was a study on different aspects of sex and sexuality. The Kama Sutra discusses not just erotic positions, it talks about sexual disorders for men as well as women. They talk about men who like only women, women who are attracted to women. And talking about that, let's talk about Bhagirath, who's credited with releasing Ganga, with freeing her actually and bringing her down to earth. Now, the interesting thing about Bhagirath is some versions of the story say that since his father was also tasked with trying to bring down Ganga to revive their ancestors, his father couldn't really have a son at that point. He died before he could, bring forth a son. He was so preoccupied with penances and he died. So at that time, the rishis there, they felt that this lineage had to be continued. It was so important. So he had two mothers, Bhagirath. So the sages blessed them and they asked them to bring forth a boy. So Bhaga refers to the female sex organ. So Bhagirath was born to two mothers actually. So again, if you're going to look at it through the lens of science, I'm talking to doctors, and I know that it's in your blood to say, okay, that doesn't make sense scientifically. Okay, but again, no, you shouldn't look at it like that. It's just a way of saying that the ancients tried different things when a conventional union failed to bring forth offspring. Just other options. Even the Mahabharata, all the characters there, they weren't born to Pandu. And today we can't really talk about divine origins. We will look at that skeptically if you're going to look at it from a rational point of view. But basically, I think of it as sperm donors. And they talk about children being born in pots, which is very close to IVF. Though again, I wouldn't put too fine a point on it. It's just a way of exploring options other than the conventional ones. So just you just have to know that. And again, just one more point when I'm talking about the nature of the myth. Like I mentioned, see, not everything is, hunky dory when it comes to Indian mythology as well. There are certain problematic viewpoints which have been handed down generation after generation. So it falls to us to, tweak it wherever possible. Blind adherence to this beautiful, it's admittedly a treasure trove. Like I said, I'm a great fan, but some aspects of it, for instance, the Bhakti movement, which has been such an inspiring movement to revive this particular way of life. It came itself because there were so many shortcomings in this religion which had to be addressed, which is so closely entwined with Indian mythology that it had to be addressed. They're talking about the caste system. They're talking about the unnecessary reliance on expensive rites and rituals from births to funerals. It was like, tyranny out there, forcing poor people to spend money they didn't have, saying your ancestors, your loved ones won't go to heaven if you don't shell out this much. So it had become, at that point, this way of life had deteriorated to a point where it was unrecognizable. And the Bhakti movement was entirely about reformation. And that's when vegetarianism also was brought in, because they borrowed liberally from Buddhist and Jain ideals. The Vedic religion, originally, all offerings had to be meat. In all these Rajasuya yagas, Ashwamedha yagas, Brahmins all ate meat, the priests. And today we talk about vegetarianism being superior to, everything else. It's ridiculous because it was only during the Bhakti movement that this happened. Sometime around the 14th, 17th centuries, that's when they incorporated vegetarianism, because that's what Buddha and Mahavira were preaching. So that's the thing about Indian mythology. We'll assimilate everything. We say Jesus is an avatar of Krishna, and so is Allah. We do that out here, this tendency to assimilate everything. But we need to just be aware. We need to be informed consumers. And again, today, when one section of people get fanatical about something I love, which is Indian mythology, I always say one of the focal points of Indian mythology is moderation, it's balance. And we've forgotten that when we become too fanatical about these things and try to force it down people's throat. You're talking about love vihar, you're going to extremes, and then we'll need another Bhakti movement type reformation to fix it. So we just, it's good to be connected to our roots. I, of all people, am a big fan of that. It's sort of like driving a car. To use a very simple analogy, you really need to keep an eye on the rear view mirror, but you can't drive by only looking at the rear view mirror. That's like an accident begging to happen. One hand on the wheel, and both hands on the wheel, and you need to see what's ahead. So that's how, you balance things out. And that's very important to remember when we talk about the relevance of mythology in modern times.
Yeah, we are like running very short of time, and we have yet 3 questions from the audience. So I will ask one by one. The first question is like, how do you see the Netflix and the Amazon, the way they are penetrating in the society and the way the children are attracted to that, vis-a-vis the traditional way of storytelling? What is the competition?
Oh, it's stiff competition. The competition is good. Netflix and Amazon have changed the way of storytelling. There's no doubt about it. It's a cultural revolution, and the power of that particular medium boggles the mind. But it just means that traditional storytellers have to up their game. As I pointed out, there's always an audience for a good story, and there's no reason why we can't work hand in hand also, because a lot of storytellers They're looking for good content. So a lot of storytellers offer their services via Netflix and Amazon. They are doing good work, yes, but everything in moderation, like I just said, a little of this, a little of that. Can't allow one medium to monopolize all else. So we do need a bit. We need books. We need oral storytelling. The personal connect at the end of the day, I think it makes a difference. A little old-fashioned is always good, and we can't fight change either. So just have to find a way to live side by side.
Okay. The second thing is like, how do you think of taking this stories or the mythological stories to the school? Because they are not in the curriculum. So if we really want to make it long lasting, in that case, we need to take it to the next generation. So what are your ideas on that?
See, that's a very nice question because this person's asked why is it not part of the curriculum, and all I'm going to say is, so why are we feeling so threatened and insecure about preserving Indian mythology? It was here before us. It's going to be here long after we are gone. Why are we so insecure? I mentioned that we should not force feed all that is good about Indian culture and tradition. There's plenty that's wrong with it also, and there's plenty that's wrong with present day India. We need to work on all those things. We should not fixate and obsess only with the past. And I have faith in our children. That's another thing I tell parents. I tell children also, they ask me, because parents want to monitor the books they're reading and all that stuff. I tell parents and children, for children, they need to use their own judgment. They need to be smart. They need to have a code of ethics of their own. And parents need to trust them a little bit more to make the right decisions. I feel they're smarter than us. They deal with so many more problems than we think it's easy because they have science and tech, but no. Children also deal with lots of stuff. I think we should just trust each other more, and we should trust that our children will not forget their roots. There's so many youngsters out there who are into Indian mythology. If you, it's like standing up in theaters for the national anthem. I think of myself as a patriot. I love listening to the national anthem. But when you say you have to stand because most of you have forgotten to take pride in being Indian, when you force feed, when you take something beautiful and make it militant, it's very counterproductive. So I definitely don't want that, which is what I said. When you make it like part of the curriculum and they have to write tests on it and write essays and treatises, you suck out much of the fun in Indian mythology, which is why which is one of the factors that has contributed to its longevity. The reason it endures, that it has entertainment value on par with the best that Netflix and Amazon has to offer. It's good quality entertainment. It's not the junk so many are addicted to. This is good quality stuff. So have faith in the material. Don't shove it down anyone's throat. Please don't. Counterproductive.
Okay, the third question was very pertinent. Like we discussed that now the attention span of the new generation is going down and down. That's what our feeling is. We may be wrong because there are a lot of distractions. So when you write your story, what things you keep in mind to look at that their attention span is less? So how do you change your story from that perspective?
See, now that's another thing where my take is somewhat different, I think, because I refuse to cater to the lowest common denominator. When it comes to the attention span, I don't want to do fast and furious stuff. And because some stories some stories when you're doing a battle scene, like the whole Kurukshetra sequence in the Mahabharata, it's fast and furious. The Bhagavad Gita is in. You need patience to get familiar with the Bhagavad Gita, or maybe some of the other more philosophical aspects of the stories. If different stories call for different styles of storytelling, and that is what I am going to stay true to. Some stories, if you need to linger a bit and let the poetic elements take over, I allow that to happen. Because see, if I'm only going to cater to people afflicted with ADHD, then I think we are going to again create a generation of ADHD people who can't let their attention, focus on just one thing for 1 minute. That's definitely not what we want. It's a discipline. We need to train ourselves to focus on things that matter. And if you really care about a subject, if you really want to, have an enriching, rewarding experience with art, you need to have patience, because a lot of the classics demand your attention. They demand that you savor each sentence. They demand multiple readings. And it can be a little trying initially. Maybe you're like, oh, this is slow, this is boring. But if you persist, the rewards are many for those who persist with this kind of material. It sets you apart from others who just did not have the patience. So why should I only cater to the impatient? I would rather cater to someone who just cares about good storytelling like me. So I think ultimately I write for myself. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm not really studying the market and that sort of thing. See, that's not necessarily the smartest move, but I still stand by it.
Yes, Satyen, please.
Yeah, Madam, before we summarize, would you like to say anything, any other points which you think you've missed out on, or should we summarize?
I think I've pretty much covered everything. Just the last thing I'm going to say is mythology, like everything else in life. Like, my favorite is chocolate sundaes and stuff. There are good, my relationship with the chocolate sundae, it has good, bad, and ugly elements. It's the same, like a marriage, like everything else. There are good, bad, ugly elements. I would suggest that when you expose yourself to mythology, take all that's good, take all that's amazing. Just once in a while, you need to, sometimes some aspects of it may bring out elements of you that's not very, good. Whatever, just try to focus on imbibing the better and leave out the bitter. That's a nice way to approach Indian mythology. And I hope you will do that.
Thank you, Madam. So, as I summarize this, first of all, I want to thank you for coming on this show and sharing your views with us, Madam. You've given us a lot of different perspective, a very different perspective on a lot of topics. I would say some sprinkling of feminism here and there, a lot of thinking from from the so-called villains' point of view. You've been talking about there not being any black and white and a lot of shades of gray in between, and we are all different shades of gray, and we're trying to understand. We are in our own journey. I really enjoyed the points where you have tried to correct the traditional stories given in Indian mythology and modified it, used your own creative freedom to modify it and make it maybe more acceptable to today's times as compared to when it was actually told. Uh, so some of the points again here are that all these stories in Indian mythology, which are numerous, they are all quests for answers in our life, for what we are going through in our day-to-day lives. A quest to find out the maybe the meaning of life, the way to live, and what is the right way to do things. And that is what mythology stories will teach us. And if you try to hear these stories or go into them to search for answers, you're probably going it in the wrong way. And you should be going to enjoy the stories and let the answers come to you. And as you go ahead in life, in your own journey, you're going to understand these things in a different way and maybe better according to the journey that you are in. Uh, Another very important point which you said was about kids. They are being kids are we need to look at them as maybe young adults and not as kids. And if you don't try to adjust it to them, you just go on. If the way you say it, it looks like you're so passionate with your storytelling that they would just zone in on those points on what you're saying on their own. They tune to your frequency of radio, as you put it up. So we need to think of them as intelligent young adults and let them take their own decisions. And if they like it, they may really get into it. And like us adults, all of us are not into it, and some of us are. Same with the kids as well. So give them their freedom. Uh, I also enjoyed your point on moderation. Always take things in moderation. All the ideas, your thoughts. Don't try to go into any extreme. Try to get a center. That center may be different for you at that time. Maybe as you go on in your journey, that center may change. You may shift towards the left or right. depending on which government is in power. No, I'm joking about that. But yes, moderation is the key. So thank you, madam, once again for being on the show. I am sure audience would have learned a lot and would have enjoyed your points of view. And we'll be putting up links to your books as well in this, so that if they want to explore this further, then they can. Dr. Ashok Sham is here. He's nodding his head. Uh, so I want to, yeah, Moini is one of them. Yeah. So I want to thank my co-panelist, Dhiren sir. Thank you for being here and giving us a calm and mature head and mature questions, and not immature ones like most of madam's kids and including me would be asking her. Uh, and again, I want to thank our audience. We've been getting very good feedback on these shows of Monday Motivation. We are getting views in the thousands, we are all only growing as every week goes on, and we hope to keep bringing different topics, more interesting topics for you, and a variety of subjects, so that we keep you motivated. Thank you, everybody, and good night.
Good night.